They laughed when she said, "I speak 10 languages." No one believed her words, just as no one believed her dreams. Her eyes, as deep as night, held the silence of one who has lost everything: family, home, hope. Her hands trembled under the rain of prejudice, but in the embrace of an elderly woman who offered her more than just a roof, she found the language she never learned from books, the language of dignity. This is the story of Ilara, the polyglot who changed justice with her voice. If you've ever felt invisible like this story, your gesture is an embrace for those who struggle in silence. And tell me, how do you think this journey will end? Your experience deserves to be heard too. The Valencia Palace of Justice gleamed under the morning sun. Its limestone columns cast long shadows onto the square, where dozens of people waited to enter courtroom number 7. The Diaz case had attracted some media interest, not for its complexity, but for its apparent simplicity. A young delinquent, an honest merchant, a frustrated robbery. Inside, the room was slowly filling up. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of onlookers and journalists. The air conditioning fought, without success, against the June heat and the breath of too many people in a confined space. In the first row, Robert Davies, a 50-year-old man in an immaculate grey suit and a navy blue tie, mentally rehearsed his testimony while his fingers drummed on his knee. Beside him, his lawyer, Paul Conway, arranged documents in his black leather briefcase. From a side door guarded by 2 civil guards, Ilara Smith appeared. She was 19, but her small frame and slumped shoulders made her look like a teenager. She wore a simple white shirt too big for her figure and borrowed black trousers. Her wrists, joined by metal handcuffs, rested on her lap. Her brown hair, pulled back in a makeshift ponytail, revealed a pale face where 2 deep black eyes stood out, fixed on the floor. "All rise," announced the usher as Judge Arthur Green entered the room. Arthur Green, 62 and with 3 decades in the judiciary, was known in Valencian legal circles for 3 things: his military punctuality, his prodigious memory, and his absolute intolerance of repeat offenders. With measured steps, he took his seat behind the bench and placed his reading glasses on his aquiline nose. "Case 347-2025, he announced in a grave voice. "The prosecution versus Ilara Smith for alleged aggravated robbery." The prosecutor, Daniel Blake, rose to his feet. Tall, thin, in a tailored suit and with a projected voice that betrayed his years of theatrical experience before turning to law, he addressed the court with the confidence of one who already felt victorious. "Your Honor, the facts are clear and the witnesses are irrefutable. On March 27th of this year, the accused entered the establishment Mary's Groceries, located at 43 Quart Street, with the intent to steal the takings. Upon being surprised by the owner, Robert Davies, she assaulted him, causing injuries that required medical assistance." Judge Green nodded as he took notes. His eyes briefly shifted towards Ilara, who remained motionless, staring at an invisible spot on the floor. The young woman's court-appointed lawyer, a middle-aged man named Ethan Hall, distractedly flipped through the file, as if seeing it for the first time. "How does the accused plead?" the judge asked, without looking up from his papers. "Ethan." Hall leaned towards Ilara and whispered something in her ear. She shook her head. "My client is exercising her right not to testify," the lawyer replied, nervously adjusting his tie. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Green frowned. "Let the record show," he said, and with a gesture indicated for the prosecutor to continue. Daniel Blake called his first witness. Robert Davies walked to the stand with a determined stride. After taking the oath, he began to recount the events with a voice broken by emotion. "I was closing the till when she walked in. At first I thought she was just another customer, but then I saw her staring intently at the cash. I asked her if she needed anything, and then she lunged at me." While Robert recounted the alleged attack, detailing how Ilara had tried to hit him with a ceramic figurine, the young woman remained motionless. Only the almost imperceptible trembling of her hands betrayed her inner state. Judge Green listened attentively, nodding. Occasionally, his eyes, trained by years of experience, had already classified the case. Another example of juvenile delinquency, another file to close before lunch. "And that's why," Robert continued, wiping away a tear, "I not only fear for my safety, but for that of my mother, an elderly woman who trusted this girl, giving her a job out of charity." The prosecutor smiled, satisfied. No further questions, Your Honor. Ethan Hall, the court-appointed lawyer, limited himself to asking irrelevant details about the store layout and the visibility from the street. His lack of interest was evident, as if he had already accepted defeat. The judge consulted his watch. Everything was going as planned. If the defense has no further witnesses to present, we will proceed with closing arguments. It was then that something unexpected happened. Ilara Smith lifted her head for the first time. Her black eyes, previously elusive, fixed directly on Judge Green's. "Before you condemn me," she said in a clear, firm voice, breaking her prolonged silence, "there is something you need to know." The judge, surprised by this unscheduled intervention, exchanged a look with the prosecutor. "Miss Smith, you must speak through your lawyer," he warned. But Ilara, as if she hadn't heard, continued, "I speak 10 languages." A second of absolute silence preceded the collective laughter that erupted in the courtroom. Prosecutor Blake couldn't suppress a mocking smile. Robert Davies looked at his lawyer with an expression of amused disbelief. Even Judge Green let out a snort. "Miss," the magistrate said, taking off his glasses with a tired gesture, "this is no time for jokes. Your situation is serious enough as it is." "It is not a joke," Ilara insisted. Her voice, barely audible before, gained firmness with every word. "I can prove it, right here." The murmur in the courtroom swelled like a tide. Judge Green pounded his gavel several times, demanding silence, his eyes now fixed on Ilara reflected more irritation than curiosity. "Miss Smith, this is a court of justice, not a talent show," he declared severely. "Your lawyer should have explained the seriousness of these proceedings." Ethan Hall shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was evident that this intervention was not part of any legal strategy he had prepared. In fact, he seemed as surprised as everyone else. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Daniel Blake intervened, not hiding his disdain, "this is an obvious tactic to divert the court's attention. I request that this behavior be noted in the record, and that we proceed with the closing arguments." Ilara remained serene, with a dignity that contrasted with the handcuffs on her wrists and the situation she was in. Her eyes, once shifty, now shone with determination. "I only ask for 5 minutes," she insisted. 5 minutes could change what you think of me." Judge Green was about to deny the request when a voice rose from the audience. It was a middle-aged woman with a clearly recognizable French accent. "I can verify if she speaks French," the woman offered, standing up. "I am Sophie Dubois, a visiting professor at the University of Valencia." Before the judge could respond, another spectator rose. He was a corpulent man with thick-rimmed glasses. "Herr Richter, ich spreche Deutsch," he said. "I can verify her German, if you wish." Judge Green, visibly annoyed by this unexpected turn, looked at Ilara with renewed interest. What exactly did this young woman intend? Was it possible that beneath that fragile appearance and former silence lay something more? 3 minutes, he finally conceded. Not a second more. And let the record show that this is completely irregular. Sophie Dubois approached the stand. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with the distinguished bearing of one who has spent her life in academic environments. She stood in front of Ilara and began to speak in French. "Pourquoi êtes-vous ici aujourd'hui? Qui s'est vraiment passé dans ce magasin?" she asked, with an impeccable Parisian accent. Without hesitation, Ilara replied in fluent French, "Je suis ici parce que j'ai essayé de protéger quelqu'un que j'aime. La vérité n'est pas toujours ce qu'elle semble être à première vue." Sophie Dubois' eyes widened in surprise. Not only had Ilara understood perfectly, but her accent and grammatical construction were practically flawless. She turned to the judge. "She speaks French like a native." She confirmed. The German man took her place. After a brief exchange in German, he too nodded with an astonished expression. "Her German is excellent. Not perfect, but certainly advanced." A young Japanese exchange student then volunteered. After a quick but complex conversation, he confirmed that Ilara spoke Japanese with surprising fluency. One after another, volunteers of various nationalities tested Ilara, a Russian tourist, an Arab merchant, a Chinese student. To everyone's astonishment, including Judge Green's, Ilara responded naturally in each language, adapting not only the words but the characteristic gestures and intonation of each tongue. Prosecutor Daniel Blake watched the scene with growing discomfort. Robert Davies, meanwhile, had sunk into his seat, his once confident face now twisted in a grimace of worry. When the last volunteer, a visiting Italian professor in Valencia, confirmed Ilara's linguistic abilities, an astonishing silence fell over the courtroom. There was no more laughter or murmuring, only perplexity. Judge Green cleared his throat. His eyes, previously cold and distant, now showed a glint of genuine curiosity. "Impressive, Miss Smith," he admitted, "but I do not understand what this has to do with the charges you face." Ilara took a breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "It has everything to do with it, Your Honor, because if you can believe that a girl like me, with no formal education, raised in an orphanage, and then on the streets, can learn 10 languages on her own, perhaps you can also believe that I am not the person he describes." She nodded towards Robert Davies, who was now avoiding her gaze. The judge leaned back in his chair, assessing the situation. "Continue," he said simply. The light streaming through the tall windows of the courthouse had changed. The mid-morning sun now cast golden rectangles onto the marble floor. In one of them, as if framed by destiny, stood Ilara Smith. The handcuffs on her wrists caught glints of light, transforming a symbol of restriction into an almost magical one. "It all began 19 years ago," Ilara began, her voice soft but clear. "I was found at the entrance of La Fe Hospital in Madrid, wrapped in a faded blue blanket with no note or identification, only a red thread bracelet tied to my wrist." She paused. No one in the courtroom moved. Even the usher, usually busy maintaining order, listened intently. After the usual procedures, I was sent to the Santa Clara Orphanage in Salamanca. It wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't a home either. There were many children, few caregivers, and even fewer resources. Judge Green, who had seen dozens of sad stories parade through his courtroom, now maintained a neutral expression, but his eyes had lost their initial hardness. "In the orphanage I discovered books," Ilara continued. "While other children played, I would hide in the small storage room where they kept donations. Among old clothes and broken toys I found dictionaries, grammars, novels in different languages. They were my only friends." Prosecutor Daniel Blake leaned forward, preparing an objection, but Judge Green stopped him with a gesture. He wanted to hear. "By the age of 8, I spoke basic Castilian, Catalan, English, and French. The caregivers considered it a curiosity, nothing more. No one thought to nurture that talent. To them, I was just another mouth to feed, another file to process." Ilara took a deep breath. Her voice, which until now had maintained a neutral tone, took on a more emotional nuance. "At 15, the law says you can choose to leave the foster care system. In reality, they push you to do it. There are younger children who need your spot," they told me. So I left with just the clothes on my back. A backpack with 2 changes of clothes, €50, and 6 dictionaries that weighed more than everything else combined. A murmur of indignation ran through the courtroom. Judge Green, again, requested silence, but his own face reflected a certain contained outrage. "The first few months I slept in shelters, bus stations, and sometimes in parks when the weather was good. I found work cleaning at a hostel in the center. They paid me little, but they let me use the showers and eat the leftover breakfast, and most importantly, I could practice languages with the tourists." Ilara lightly raised her handcuffed hands, as if to emphasize her words. "I learned Italian from a group of students from Bologna who stayed for a month, Russian from a couple from St. Petersburg who gave me a manual when they left. German came from a Berliner tourist who left me his old tablet. I installed free language apps and studied every night until my eyes burned." The court-appointed lawyer, Ethan Hall, who had been almost invisible until now, watched his client with a mixture of astonishment and shame. It was evident that he had not taken the time to learn her story. 3 months ago," Ilara continued, "while working at a cafe near the market, I met Mrs. Mary." Upon hearing this name, Robert Davies visibly tensed in his seat. Prosecutor Daniel Blake gave him a warning look. "Mrs. Mary Davies," Ilara specified, looking directly at Robert, "an extraordinary woman who runs a small grocery store. She came every morning for a week. She always ordered the same thing, coffee with milk and toast with tomato. She always left a tip, even if it was just 20 cents. Ilara smiled for the first time since she had started speaking. It was a smile laden with affection. "One day she overheard me speaking Mandarin with some customers. She was fascinated. She asked me how many languages I spoke. When I said 10, she laughed exactly like you did a while ago. But then she tested me with a Portuguese customer and then with a French one. When the cafe closed, she offered me a job at her store. Judge Green narrowed his eyes, beginning to glimpse where this story was leading. Mrs. Mary told me her store attracted many foreigners in the neighborhood. She needed someone who could communicate with them. She offered me a small salary and something much more valuable, a room in the back room, a place of my own, after 4 years of living without a home. Ilara paused. Her eyes had welled up, but she maintained her composure. During those 3 months, Mrs. Mary became the mother I never had. She taught me how to cook paella, how to keep the business accounts, how to tell when fish is fresh. At night after closing, we would sit and have tea, and she would tell me stories of her youth in Valencia. Her voice acquired a darker tone as she continued. But there was something that overshadowed her happiness. Her son Robert, who she said hadn't appeared for years until 3 weeks ago. All eyes turned to Robert Davies, whose face had turned bright red. Prosecutor Daniel Blake rose to his feet. Your Honor, this is inadmissible. The accused is trying to defame the witness without presenting evidence. Judge Green considered the objection for a few seconds. The accused has the right to present her version of the facts, he ruled. Continue, Miss Smith, but confine yourself to what is relevant to this case. Ilara nodded. 3 weeks ago, Robert appeared at the store. He didn't come to visit. He came for money. I heard him tell his mother he had debts, that some men were looking for him. Mrs. Mary refused to give him her savings. She told him that this time she wouldn't give in, that he only ever came back when he needed something. Robert Davies stood up furious. That's a lie. This thief is inventing everything. Order, Judge Green commanded, banging his gavel. Mr. Davies, you will have your opportunity to respond. Sit down immediately, or I will have you removed from the courtroom. Robert sat down, muttering under his breath. Prosecutor Daniel Blake whispered something in his ear, trying to calm him. The day of the incident, Ilara proceeded. I was in my room organizing the inventory. I heard shouting. When I went out, I saw Robert pointing a gun at Mrs. Mary. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Judge Green frowned. A gun? Are you sure of what you are saying, Miss Smith? That is a very serious accusation. Completely sure, Your Honor, Ilara affirmed with conviction. Robert was demanding the safe where Mrs. Mary kept her savings. She was crying, begging him to leave. I acted without thinking. I grabbed the first thing I found, a ceramic figurine, and hit Robert on the arm to make him drop the weapon. Judge Green raised a hand, stopping the narrative. If what you say is true, Miss Smith, why did the police find you with the weapon, as the report states? Ilara nodded as if she had expected that question. In the confusion, the gun fell to the floor. I picked it up to take it away from Robert. At that moment, 2 officers entered, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the shouts. Robert, bleeding from the arm, immediately yelled that I had tried to rob him and had attacked him. The officers saw the store in disarray, me with a weapon and an injured man. They drew their conclusions. Prosecutor Daniel Blake rose again. Your Honor, these are mere allegations without any proof. The word of a destitute girl against that of a respectable citizen. I request that this testimony be dismissed and that we proceed with the sentencing. Judge Green ignored the prosecutor and addressed Ilara directly. Miss Smith, if your version is true, where is Mrs. Mary Davies now? Why hasn't she appeared as a witness? Ilara lowered her gaze for the first time since she had started speaking. She's afraid, Your Honor. Afraid of her own son. The courtroom clock read 11:42 a.m. The trial that should have concluded more than an hour ago was still ongoing, transformed by the unexpected testimony of a young woman whom no one had taken seriously at first. Judge Arthur Green removed his glasses and massaged the bridge of his nose. Throughout his career, he had presided over hundreds of cases, from neighbor disputes to complex homicides. But something about this case, or perhaps this accused, prevented him from following the usual procedure. There was something in Ilara Smith's eyes, in the precision of her words, in the dignity with which she endured the humiliation, that made him doubt his own initial conclusions. Your Honor, Prosecutor Daniel Blake insisted impatiently, this melodramatic story is unfounded. If there were any proof of what the accused alleges, her defense should have presented it, which clearly they have not done. Ethan Hall, the court-appointed lawyer, coughed uncomfortably. It was clear that he had not investigated the case beyond the superficial. He hadn't even requested the appearance of Mrs. Mary, a potentially crucial witness. Judge Green made an unusual decision. This court deems it necessary to hear the testimony of Mrs. Mary Davies before proceeding, he announced. The session is adjourned until 1 p.m. Officer Thompson, locate Mrs. Davies and bring her before this court. Robert Davies jumped to his feet. My mother is an elderly woman with heart problems. She cannot be subjected to this stress. Judge Green looked at him severely. Mr. Davies, if your mother cannot appear for health reasons, you must present a medical certificate to attest to it. Otherwise, her presence is required by this court. Prosecutor Daniel Blake approached his client, whispering something in his ear that seemed to calm him momentarily. Robert Davies sat down again, but his body language betrayed his nervousness. Drumming fingers, a constantly moving leg, and an erratic gaze. As the courtroom began to empty for the recess, Judge Green gestured to the officer to bring Ilara Smith to the stand. With the handcuffs restricting her movements, Ilara advanced with short steps. Miss Smith, the judge said in a low voice, so only she could hear him, I have presided over enough trials to recognize when someone is lying and when they are telling the truth. You appear to be telling the truth, but I need more than my intuition to make a decision. If there is anything else you can tell us, any evidence we can verify, now is the time. Ilara maintained her gaze fixed on the magistrate's tired eyes. The security camera, she whispered. Mrs. Mary installed a small camera behind the counter 6 months ago after an attempted robbery. It's discreet. It looks like a simple motion detector. It records directly onto an SD card. Judge Green nodded imperceptibly. Officer Thompson, he called, when you go to find Mrs. Davies, check if such a device exists and bring that too. Have a technician prepared to view it. Robert Davies, who was watching the scene from his seat, turned pale. At 1:05 p.m., the courtroom filled again. The news that the case had taken an unexpected turn had spread like wildfire, attracting more spectators. Among them were some local journalists taking notes with renewed interest. Judge Green entered and took his place. His expression was even more serious than before. Call the witness, he ordered. The side door opened. Leaning on the arm of Officer Thompson, a small woman in her 70s entered. Mrs. Mary Davies wore a simple floral dress and a grey shawl over her shoulders. Her white hair, pulled back in a tight bun, framed a face furrowed with wrinkles that spoke of a life not always easy. Her steps were uncertain, not so much from physical weakness as from the fear that emanated from her entire being. Upon seeing Ilara, her eyes filled with tears. She made a small, barely perceptible gesture with her hand, which the young woman returned with a sad smile. Robert Davies stood up and advanced towards his mother. Mum, you don't have to do this. The doctor said you needed to rest. Officer Thompson stepped between them. Sir, return to your seat. After taking the oath, Mrs. Mary took a seat in the witness chair. Her gaze alternated between the judge, her son Robert, and Ilara. Her hands, gnarled and age-spotted, did not stop twisting a cloth handkerchief. Mrs. Davies, Judge Green began in a respectful tone, I understand that this situation is difficult for you, but we need your testimony to clarify what happened in your establishment last March 27th. Mrs. Mary nodded slightly. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know what to say, Your Honor. The truth, madam, Green replied. Only the truth. Mrs. Mary closed her eyes for an instant as if gathering strength. Then she looked at her son, who returned a look that mixed plea and threat. Robert is a good son, she began. It's just that sometimes he has difficulties. Prosecutor Daniel Blake interrupted. Your Honor, the witness appears confused. I suggest we focus on the facts of the day in question. Judge Green nodded. Mrs. Davies, could you tell us what really happened on March 27th at your store? A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Mrs. Mary looked at Ilara, who remained upright despite the handcuffs, with a dignity that contrasted with her situation. Then she looked at her son, whose leg continued to tremble. And then, like a dam that finally gives way under pressure, Mrs. Mary began to speak. Robert came to ask me for money, she said, her voice firmer. Again, it's always the same. He appears when he has problems, when he owes someone money. This time it was more serious. He spoke of dangerous men, of gambling debts. Robert sank into his seat. Prosecutor Blake, visibly uncomfortable, skimmed his notes as if looking for a way out. I told him no, Mrs. Mary continued, gaining confidence. For the first time in my life I told my son no, that it was time he faced his responsibilities, that I was old, that this money was for my old age. Mrs. Mary wiped a tear with the crumpled handkerchief. He got furious. I had never seen him like that. He took out a gun. He told me to give him the code to the safe or... She couldn't continue. Sobs shook her frail body. Judge Green offered her a glass of water, which she accepted with trembling hands. "Take your time, madam," he said gently. After a few moments, Mrs. Mary continued. Ilara came out of the back room. She didn't know what was happening. She saw Robert with the weapon and... She reacted. She grabbed a ceramic figurine I have on the counter, a souvenir from Portugal, and hit Robert on the arm. The courtroom remained in absolute silence. No one moved, no one coughed, no one whispered. There was confusion. Robert dropped the gun. Ilara picked it up. Then the police arrived. And Robert... Mrs. Mary looked at her son with a mixture of pain and disappointment. Robert lied. He said Ilara had tried to rob him, that she had attacked him. And I didn't say anything. I was afraid. I've always been afraid of my own son. Judge Green took a deep breath. Mrs. Davies, are you aware of the implications of what you are declaring? Your son could face serious charges. Mrs. Mary nodded slowly. I know, Your Honor. And perhaps it's for the best for him. Perhaps that way he can finally face his problems. Robert Davies stood up abruptly. You're lying. This is all that vagrant's fault. She's manipulated you against your own son. Order! Judge Green demanded, banging his gavel. Mr. Davies, sit down immediately or you will be removed from the courtroom. But Robert, beside himself, tried to move towards the stand where his mother was. 2 civil guards intercepted him, holding him by the arms. Officer Thompson, Judge Green ordered, arrest Mr. Davies. He is provisionally charged with perjury, attempted robbery with intimidation, and illegal possession of a firearm. As the guards led away a still shouting and struggling Robert, the judge addressed the technical officer who had just entered the courtroom. Did you find the device mentioned by the accused? The technician nodded, showing a small security camera and a laptop. Yes, Your Honor. It was exactly where Miss Smith indicated. I have extracted the video corresponding to the day of the incident. Judge Green ordered the video to be projected onto the courtroom screen. The images, although grainy and without sound, clearly showed the sequence described by Ilara and Mrs. Mary. Robert threatening his mother with a weapon, Ilara intervening with the figurine, the subsequent confusion, and the arrival of the police. When the playback finished, Judge Green removed his glasses and methodically cleaned them with a handkerchief, as he usually did when he needed a few seconds to gather his thoughts. This court has been misled, he finally declared. The charges against Ilara Smith are dismissed. Officer, remove Miss Smith's handcuffs immediately. Officer Thompson approached Ilara and, with a metallic click, freed her wrists. She instinctively rubbed the red marks the handcuffs had left. Miss Smith, the judge continued, this court apologizes for the treatment you have received. You have demonstrated not only your innocence, but also exceptional courage in defending Mrs. Davies. Ilara nodded, too emotional to speak. Mrs. Mary got up with difficulty and, avoiding the usher, advanced to embrace the young woman. The 2 women remained thus, united, as the courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Judge Green let the moment linger before requesting silence. Again. Let the record show, he said, with a solemnity that underscored the importance of the moment, that on this day, justice has prevailed thanks to the bravery of a young woman who, against all odds, found her voice. The Valencian spring was advancing with its characteristic mix of radiant sun and brief showers that left the air clean and fragrant. In the small grocery store in the Carmen neighborhood, Ilara Smith carefully arranged some cans on the newly painted sky-blue shelves. 3 weeks had passed since the trial, and life was trying to resume its normal course. Mrs. Mary, sitting behind the cash register, distractedly flipped through a magazine while proudly watching the young woman she now considered her own daughter. Since Robert had been arrested, an invisible weight seemed to have been lifted from her shoulders. She smiled more, slept better, and even her blood pressure, always problematic, had stabilized. Ilara, the elderly woman called. Come see this. Ilara approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Mary pointed to a page in the local magazine where a small note titled Polyglot Foils Robbery appeared. The article, barely a paragraph, briefly mentioned the case of a young woman who spoke 10 languages and how she had debunked a false accusation thanks to her eloquence. "They don't mention your name, thank goodness," Mrs. Mary said. "The last thing you need is more attention." Ilara smiled, grateful for the journalist's discretion. In the past weeks, she had turned down several interview requests. She didn't want to become a media curiosity. She only wished to continue her quiet life with Mrs. Mary, learning the secrets of the business, studying her languages, and saving up to perhaps, someday, enroll in university. The doorbell rang, announcing the entry of a customer. It was Peter, the neighborhood postman, a jovial man in his 50s who always had a smile and an anecdote to share. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted, placing a small stack of mail on the counter. "The mail is heavy today." While Mrs. Mary checked the usual bills and advertisements, Peter leaned towards Ilara. "I've brought you something special," he said, winking. "A package that arrived at the central office. It would normally take longer, but when I saw your name, I brought it personally." He handed her a medium-sized padded envelope. Ilara examined it curiously. She wasn't expecting any delivery. The sender's address corresponded to a company called Valencian Media Group that she didn't recognize. "Thank you, Peter," she said, tucking the envelope under the counter. She would open it later when she was alone. Peter bought his usual bottle of anise and a box of biscuits, paid, and said goodbye with another smile. When the store was empty again, Ilara retrieved the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside, she found a USB drive and a handwritten note. "The truth should be known. Watch it before deciding. George Miller, journalist." That night, after closing the store, Ilara connected the USB drive to the small tablet she used for studying. A video file appeared on the screen. As she played it, Ilara held her breath. It was a complete recording of her trial, likely captured by a hidden camera. Someone had filmed everything. A revelation about the languages, the testimonies, Mrs. Mary's confession, Robert's arrest. Ilara turned off the tablet, disturbed. What was this journalist's intention? To publish the video without her consent. She decided not to mention it to Mrs. Mary, so as not to worry her, and waited to see if this George Miller would contact her again. She didn't have to wait long. The next day, while attending to a German tourist looking for ingredients for a typical dish from his country, Ilara noticed a young man patiently waiting his turn, observing her with undisguised interest. "I speak Spanish. You don't need to test me with your perfect German," the man said when the tourist left. "I'm George Miller." He was tall, thin, with thick-rimmed glasses and a nervous but determined air. He wore a wrinkled shirt and carried a worn backpack that betrayed his profession, independent journalist. "The video is yours," Ilara said directly. "How did you get it?" George looked around, confirming they were alone. "A friend in the court administration," he confessed quietly. "It's not officially allowed, but he thought it was important to preserve what happened there." "And what do you plan to do with it?" George seemed surprised by the question. "That depends on you," he replied. "I believe your story deserves to be told. A young woman without resources who learns 10 languages on her own, saves an elderly woman, and dismantles a false accusation using only her intelligence and courage. It's inspiring." Ilara shook her head. "I don't want to inspire anyone. I just want to live in peace." George nodded, respecting her stance. "I understand, but consider this. What if your story could change the perception that judges have of people like you, young people without resources, whom the judicial system tends to prejudge?" Before Ilara could answer, Mrs. Mary returned from the doctor. The conversation was interrupted, but George left his card on the counter. "Think about it," he said simply before leaving. 3 days later, while Ilara was studying Arabic in her small back room, her tablet emitted a series of notifications. Text messages, emails, social media alerts, all arriving simultaneously like a digital avalanche. Confused, she opened the first one. It was from Mike, a waiter from the cafe where she had worked months ago. "You're famous. Have you seen the video?" With an unsettling premonition, Ilara searched the internet. It didn't take long to find it. The girl with 10 languages humiliates judge and prosecutor. The video of her trial, edited to highlight the most dramatic moments, had been published on several platforms and was already racking up hundreds of thousands of views. Ilara's stomach clenched. George Miller had published the video without her consent, As she read the comments, some admiring, others skeptical, some decidedly hostile, her phone rang. It was George. "I know you're angry," he said before she could speak, "but it wasn't me who published it. My USB drive was stolen from my apartment 2 days ago. I was going to tell you, but—" "Do you expect me to believe you?" Ilara interrupted, with a coldness that surprised the journalist himself. "I can prove it," George insisted. "I have the police report I filed. This is serious, Ilara. Someone wanted your story out, with or without your consent." After hanging up, Ilara felt dizzy. Her private life, her painful history, her moment of vulnerability in court. It was all now exposed to public scrutiny, and the worst thing was that she had no control over it. In the following hours, the video continued to spread. Local journalists began showing up at the store. Mrs. Mary, alarmed, closed the blinds and put up the "closed for inventory" sign. "This will pass," the elderly woman tried to comfort her as she prepared linden tea for both of them. "People will forget in a few days." But it wasn't so. On the contrary, the story of the courtroom polyglot captured national attention. Morning television shows commented on the case. Pundits debated the deficiencies of the judicial system and discrimination against young people in vulnerable situations. Professional linguists analyzed the fragments where Ilara spoke various languages, confirming her extraordinary fluency. By midday, the store phone wouldn't stop ringing. Ilara disconnected it after receiving 3 offers to appear on television programs and a proposal to write her memoirs. "We should call Ethan Hall," Mrs. Mary suggested. Ilara shook her head. Her court-appointed lawyer, who had done so little during the trial, would now want to capitalize on the situation. She didn't trust him. Instead, she called George Miller. Despite her initial suspicions, something told her the young journalist was sincere when he claimed not to have leaked the video. "I need help," Ilara admitted when he answered. "I don't know how to handle this." "I'm on my way," was George's simple reply. While waiting for him, Ilara checked her social media. The tide of notifications was overwhelming. Amidst messages of support and friend requests, she also found disturbing comments. "Professional liar. This is a setup. No one learns so many languages without money. She surely has high-level contacts." Most disturbing were the messages that began to arrive from people who claimed to know her past in the orphanage, former classmates who remembered her as weird and antisocial, caregivers who downplayed her linguistic talent. The story was being distorted, reinterpreted by people who barely knew her. When George arrived, he found Ilara and Mrs. Mary in the backroom kitchen, both visibly upset. Without ceremony, he took out his laptop and began to analyze the situation. "The video has been shared by several influential accounts," he explained. "It's impossible to stop it now. What we can do is control the narrative." "What does that mean?" Ilara asked cautiously. "It means you decide how you want to tell your story instead of letting others tell it for you," George replied. "An official statement, perhaps a controlled interview with a respectable media outlet." Ilara shook her head. "I don't want more exposure. I just want to be left alone." George looked at her with understanding but firmness. "That's no longer an option, Ilara. The story is out. If you don't control it, others will. And not everyone has good intentions." To illustrate his point, he showed a thread on a social network where a supposed linguistics expert questioned the authenticity of Ilara's abilities, suggesting that the whole thing had been a setup to discredit the judicial system. "This is just the beginning," George warned. "Soon there will be conspiracy theories, accusations, perhaps even real threats." Mrs. Mary, who had been silent, took Ilara's hand. "Maybe you should listen to him, dear. This boy seems to know what he's talking about." Ilara looked out the back room window. The normally quiet street was now occupied by several journalists patiently waiting, cameras in hand. "An interview," she finally conceded. "Just one. With someone who respects my conditions." George nodded, relieved. "I know the perfect person. Carla Rivers from the program Voices. She's serious, rigorous, and always respects her interviewees." While George made the call, Ilara checked her messages again. Amidst the avalanche of notifications, an email from an unknown address stood out. The subject line simply read, "We know who you really are." The content was even more unsettling. An old photo of her in the orphanage, next to a woman Ilara didn't recognize. With trembling hands, she closed the email without mentioning it to anyone. A feeling of cold spread through her body, as if someone had just opened a window to a past she firmly believed was closed. The interview with Carla Rivers was scheduled for 3 days later. George had negotiated strict conditions. No questions about Ilara's biological identity, no details about her current life beyond what was already known, and the option to stop the recording at any time. But for Ilara, even those 3 days of waiting felt eternal. The small grocery store had become a besieged fortress. Journalists camped out on the pavement. Some curious neighbors repeatedly walked past the storefront, and phone calls, when they reconnected the device, did not stop. The worst, however, were the online messages. The email with the mysterious photo had only been the beginning. Since then, Ilara had received dozens of unsettling messages, supposed information about her biological family, theories about her true intentions, and even veiled threats. What would people say if they knew about the Institute? Do you remember Dr. Fox? Your real talent is not languages. George insisted on reporting the harassment to the police, but Ilara continued to resist. Something in those messages awakened uncomfortable memories, fragments of her past that she had buried under layers of new languages and experiences. She needed time to organize her thoughts, to reconstruct her own history before sharing it with the police or anyone else. A week after the broadcast of Voices, Ilara received an unexpected call. It was Ethan Hall, her former court-appointed lawyer. "Miss Smith," he greeted, with a cordiality he hadn't shown during the trial. "I would like to meet with you to discuss an important matter." "I no longer need your services, Mr. Hall," Ilara replied coldly. "The case is closed." "It's not about the case," the lawyer insisted. "It's about a proposal I've received that could greatly benefit you. Believe me, you'll want to hear this." Intrigued despite her caution, Ilara agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. George offered to accompany her, but she declined. She needed to handle this alone. Ethan Hall arrived punctually, wearing a noticeably smarter suit than the one he had worn during the trial. He sat opposite Ilara with a smile that was meant to be affable. "I've received a proposal from a publishing house," he announced without preamble. "They want to publish a book about your story. They are offering a substantial advance and royalties for every copy sold." Ilara looked at him with distrust. "I'm not interested in more exposure." "Think carefully," Hall insisted. "You could earn enough money to study at university, perhaps even abroad." Seeing Ilara hesitate, he added, "Furthermore, the publisher has contacts in television, international programs, documentaries." "Who exactly contacted you?" Ilara asked. Hall hesitated. "A literary agent, representative of a major publishing house." "I want a name." Hall nervously consulted his phone. "Dr. Robert Fox." Ilara turned pale. That name. It stirred unsettling echoes in her memory. "Tell him I'm not interested," she replied, standing up abruptly. Leaving the cafe, Ilara felt scattered pieces beginning to fall into place. Dr. Fox, now she remembered. The man who had visited the orphanage when she was 12. The one who had conducted psychological and linguistic tests, promising scholarships and opportunities that never materialized. That night, as Ilara tried to sleep, her phone rang. It was a private number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ilara Smith," a deep masculine voice said. "It's been a long time. I am Dr. Robert Fox." Ilara's heart sped up. "What do you want?" "To talk. To explain what really happened 7 years ago, and to make you a proposal that could change your life." "I'm not interested." "I have information about your biological family," Fox added. Ilara held her breath. It was her weak point, and he knew it. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Neuroscience Institute, Office 307, Fox said before hanging up. Ilara spent the night awake, debating between curiosity and fear. In the morning, against her better judgment, she found herself walking towards the indicated address. The Neuroscience Institute occupied a modern building on the university campus. At reception, a secretary was waiting for her. "Dr. Fox will see you now." Robert Fox was just as she remembered him. Tall, thin, with perfectly styled grey hair and penetrating grey eyes behind metal-rimmed glasses. "Please sit down," he indicated, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. "I assume you have questions." "You're the one who's been sending the messages," Ilara accused. Fox nodded. "I needed to get your attention and confirm that you were truly the girl I met in Salamanca." "Why?" "Because you, Ilara, are exceptional. not just because of your languages, but because of how your brain processes them. Fox explained that 7 years ago, he was leading a study on exceptional linguistic aptitude in disadvantaged children. Ilara had been his most promising subject. Tests showed that your brain possesses extraordinary linguistic plasticity. You can acquire new languages with a speed and precision we've only observed in less than 0.01% of the population. So why did you disappear? Ilara asked. You told me I could get a scholarship. You gave me hope. Fox sighed. The project lost funding. I tried to continue, but he paused. Now I have new sponsors, we can pick up where we left off. What exactly are you proposing? A comprehensive research program. You would receive academic training, advanced language coaching, and of course generous compensation. In exchange for what? For allowing us to study your learning process, brain scans, cognitive tests, recorded sessions of new language acquisition. Ilara considered it. The offer was tempting, but something didn't quite fit. Who are your sponsors? Fox smiled enigmatically. That is confidential for now, but I can assure you they are people of great influence. Before leaving, Ilara asked, What do you know about my family? Enough to know that you were not abandoned by choice, Fox replied, handing her an envelope. These documents will give you a start. There's more if you accept my proposal. Back at the store, Ilara opened the envelope with trembling hands. It contained a partially redacted birth certificate and a blurry photograph of a young woman in a hospital bed. Mrs. Mary found her silently crying. What's wrong, dear? Between sobs, Ilara told her everything. The messages, Fox, the proposal, the documents. I don't know what to do, she confessed. Part of me wants to accept, to know more about my origin, to have the education I always dreamed of. But another part distrusts his intentions. Mrs. Mary hugged her. Only you can make that decision. But remember that you are not alone now. That night, as she reflected, Ilara received a surprise call. Judge Arthur Green. Miss Smith, forgive the hour, he began. I have seen your interview and followed the subsequent events. I would like to speak with you. It is important. The next day, Ilara went to the judge's office. To her surprise, he was not alone. He was accompanied by Carla Rivers and an unknown woman who introduced herself as Eleanor Davies, a representative of the Ministry of Justice. We have been investigating Dr. Fox, Green explained. His sponsors are a private organization with government connections. They are developing neuronal automatic translation and communication analysis technologies. In other words, Carla added, they want to study your brain to improve their artificial intelligence and surveillance algorithms. Your case has highlighted serious deficiencies in our judicial system, Eleanor Davies continued. Prejudice, lack of guarantees for vulnerable youth, accelerated procedures, and what do you propose, Ilara asked. A legislative reform that is already in parliamentary process, Davies replied. They informally call it Ilara's Law. It will establish new protocols to prevent convictions based on social stereotypes. Judge Green added, we also want to offer you something personal. The University of London has shown interest in your case. They are offering a full scholarship to study linguistics. And the UN is looking for young translators for its young professionals. Program, Carla Rivers completed. I told them about you. Ilara looked at them stunned. Why are you doing this for me? Because every system needs a mirror to reflect its defects in order to correct them, Green replied. You have been that mirror for Spanish justice. 6 months later, Ilara walked the historic halls of the University of London. Her decision had been clear. Reject Fox and accept the academic scholarship. The transition had not been easy. The first months in London were marked by recurring nightmares and anxiety attacks. The unexpected fame, the veiled threats, the partial information about her biological family, it had all left emotional scars. But gradually, Ilara found her rhythm. Her professors were impressed by her natural linguistic intuition. Her classmates, initially intimidated by her fame, discovered a reserved but kind young woman, always willing to help with translations and group projects. During the Christmas break, Ilara returned to Valencia to visit Mrs. Mary. The elderly woman had converted the back room into a small apartment she rented to foreign students to practice languages, she would say with a smile. Have you heard anything else about your family? Mary asked one night, as they shared a homemade paella. Ilara shook her head. I've decided to put that search aside for now. My family is you, and the friends I'm making. And Fox. He disappeared when I turned down his offer. I suppose he found another exceptional subject. What Ilara didn't mention was the letter she had received a week earlier, signed by A.G., initials she recognized as those of Arthur Green. The letter included the confidential report of an investigation into the Santa Clara orphanage and certain irregular adoption procedures in the years she was born. There were no definitive conclusions, but it offered clues that one day, when she felt ready, she could follow. A year later, Ilara was at the UN headquarters in Geneva. She had successfully completed her first semester as a translator intern and was now part of the team covering Human Rights Council sessions. In her small apartment, a message from Arthur Green awaited in her inbox. Justice is not imposed, it is learned. The phrase perfectly summed up Ilara's journey, from a silent child in an orphanage to a woman who now used her voice, in multiple languages, to build bridges between cultures. That afternoon, after an intense session of simultaneous translation between 5 languages, Ilara decided to visit the hospital where, according to Fox's documents, she had been abandoned 19 years earlier. She didn't expect to find answers, only to close a circle. She left a small bouquet of flowers at the entrance and silently thanked that place which, unknowingly, had been the first chapter of her story. As she left, a familiar figure was waiting for her, Mrs. Mary, who had traveled surprisingly to visit her. "How did you know I would be here?" Ilara asked, hugging her. "Because I know you," the elderly woman replied simply, "and because some stories need to be completed to be able to continue." As they walked together through the streets of Geneva, Ilara reflected on the strange path she had traveled. The languages which she had learned as a shield against loneliness had become bridges to others. Her story, which she had tried to keep private, now inspired legislative and social changes. That night, during a dinner where Mary insisted on practicing her rudimentary French, Ilara received a message from the University of Geneva. They were inviting her to give a lecture on self-directed language learning in contexts of adversity. "Will you do it?" Mary asked. Ilara smiled. "Yes, because I've learned that there is one language that transcends all others, the truth told with dignity." As she watched the city lights reflected in the lake, Ilara thought of that courtroom where, just a year before, she had found her voice. Now, she knew that the true power did not lie in speaking 10 languages, but in having something valuable to say in any of them.